Some men think the earth is round, others think it is flat. It is a matter capable of question, but if it is flat, will the king's command make it round? And if it is round, will the king's command flatten it? So says Sir Thomas More, who stood up to King Henry VIII when the king rejected the Catholic Church's denial of his divorce, and Henry ended up essentially forming his own church, the Church of England. The king highly respects More as an old friend. In fact, the entire country knows him as a trustworthy man of principle and honesty. All of the king's yes-men, the ministers and such, have made no attempt to dissuade the king in his efforts to divorce his first wife, one of the reasons why More's blessings would mean so much, but as a man of principle, he refuses. Well, to put it more accurately, he remains silent when told to sign an oath in acceptance of the king's marriage, and this is a major point of contention for the characters in the movie, looking to have More done on treason, in the sense that does his act of remaining silent constitute a denial of the king's new title? This movie is one of the best studies of personal integrity I've seen on film. Director Fred Zinnemann and writer Robert Bolt have delivered a stunning achievement, one characterized superbly by Paul Scofield. Joining him are the likes of Leo McKern as the sinister and scheming Thomas Cromwell, John Hurt as the slimy Richard Rich, and Robert Shaw in an energetic, enticing but domineering Henry VIII. Orson Welles was also in the film for the first couple of minutes. It was quite peculiar seeing a titan like Welles in a film for such a short amount of time. He just kind of comes and goes and looks quite drunk and deranged during his short visit. Thomas More is quite early on shown to be a prayerful Catholic. We can see from the off he is sincere in his beliefs, but is surrounded by hypocrites, such as during his small family huddle during a quick prayer in which the Duke of Norfolk and Richard Rich stand in the background, not joining in. In the current predicament, More is quite simply a one-man army, completely alone in a time where the line between popes and kings is starting to blur. The injecting of man's own laws into apparent divine text is prevalent, and the laws of the land and of the religion are at odds with one another. It's not simply a case of a man refusing to acknowledge a marriage because of the church. The issue is much more than that of a single divorce. The divorce is the opening of the floodgates, a changing of the tide, and a symbol for the larger issue. The church officials and the king's minions are weak. All those around More are morally corrupt and compromised, and the events of the film accumulate into the most credible and honest character standing in a court full of crooked and cowardly men on trial for treason. More himself knows this, and it is best summarized in his exchange with the Duke of Norfolk, which goes as, More saying, "Have I your word that what we say here is between us two?" And then the Duke replies, "Very well." Then More says, "And if the king should command you to repeat what I may say?" The Duke then says, "I should keep my word to you." Then More replies, "Then what has become of your oath of obedience to the king?" The Duke of Norfolk dismisses this by saying, "You lay traps for me." And then More replies, "No, I show you the times." Henry VIII is a temporal ruler. They come and go. But More was unwilling to go against what he saw as the divine law in order to satisfy the king. It was truly remarkable and refreshing to see a character who stuck by his morals and ethics to such an extent that it ends up costing him dearly. I was profoundly moved by More's steadfastness and integrity, and his staying unwaveringly true to his character in the face of numerous dangers and seductive promising of riches. Just as a side note, it was also interesting to hear the other side of the argument from some characters, which was that after years of civil war in England, the threat would once again arise if Henry died without having a male heir. So this was one of the incentives for some people in the movie, in that an heir promised peace for the country. It's impossible to talk about this film without crediting its brilliant dialogue. The movie is flooded with verbal duels and jousts, mainly between More and Cromwell, which just floor you with how intricate and well written they are. I had to rewind the film several times just to soak in how awesome many of the lines were. And let's not forget the actors' outstanding delivery of them. Scofield, for example, gave a dignified and restrained performance, but his verbal put-downs often came with a charming twinkle. His delivery felt forceful but refined, often conveyed with enormous gravity and with a poignant aftertaste. There are so many great lines in the film. Sometimes just one or two are enough to unravel a character or completely flip the power balance in a conversation. It's impossible to pick a favourite from the wordplay, but just one taste, for example, is from the following exchange between Moore and Cromwell. Moore says, "You threaten like a dockside bully." And Cromwell asks, "How should I threaten?" And Moore says, "Like a minister of state, with justice." And then Cromwell says, "Oh, justice is what you're threatened with." And then Moore replies, "Then I am not threatened." Meaning that obviously if justice is going to be served, then Moore will remain unharmed. It's not often you see a film whose dialogue reaches such heights, and even more precious it is when the actors deliver it with equally dazzling brilliance. You know, I couldn't help thinking there was a similar story I'd heard while watching the movie, and then it hit me. The story of Moore is quite similar to the tragic story of Imam Hussein rahimullah at the Battle of Karbala in the Islamic world. That too was a story of a man of courage and conviction who stood by his principles, even at the cost of his life. This is a great film, one that is masterfully written and acted, and some nice visuals to boot. I give it an 8.5 out of 10.